3 filters. It'll fix it right up. So my friend calls me. He said, hey, can I borrow your car? I want to see if this fixes your car. I said, absolutely. Absolutely. He flushed it 3 times with 3 filters. And it turns out that my transmission is not broken. It was gunked up. Drives like butter. It drives better than the day I got it, which was like 6 years ago, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 4 years ago. I said, now what would I have done if I had replaced this sucker? But you know what? It couldn't be me because my God is bigger, and I was faithful, and I sat and I waited, and the Lord rewarded me. And you know what? He is good.
So we're talking about a 2016 Ford Explorer Platinum, and we're going to do it as a customer complaint. Customer complaint is the vehicle starts shuddering. Let's just say once it gets warm, driving around town, and it feels like it's shaking a lot. They took the vehicle to a mechanic. The mechanic said, replace the transmission. Now, is that mechanic wrong? No, the mechanic's not wrong. There was an engineer in the shop. I don't know how the whole timeline lines out. The engineer says, actually, no, that's not it. Just bring it into the shop over here, and we'll flush it 3 times, and we'll get the transmission operating correct for you. Okay. Both people are correct. But where the downfall would be here is, for one, we don't know mileage. We don't know service history. All we know is it's a 2016 Ford Explorer Platinum. So to speak on that part, I really can't do too much other than the fact that I know most customers don't service their transmission enough. Most of these customers with these Ford Explorers and F-150s and Expeditions and any car on the road, they're going by these longer maintenance intervals that are not recommended. Just flat out not recommended by any of us, only the manufacturer, because it makes them actually look better, because you have to service the vehicle less, which they get in better standing with the government, which allows them to continue producing vehicles a specific way. Now, what's the downfall to flushing the transmission 3 times to get it to start acting right? I've actually diagnosed this very vehicle, not the very vehicle, but this very year, make, model, whatever, not exactly down to the trim level, but this vehicle. I had somebody come in and say, hey man, once this gets warm, even sometimes cold, whenever I'm going uphill or I'm under a little bit of a load, this just starts shuddering like crazy, like shaking like crazy. And I went out and I pull up a misfire chart thinking that it could be the engine, and I'm getting no misfires out of the engine at all. Shut my data logger down for my misfire chart, and I pull up my torque converter control, actual, all of my torque converter PIDs, and drive around, and the torque converter is just breaking down constantly under a load, especially when it gets warm. The torque converter is just causing all kinds of problems, and what starts to happen is those torque converters start to fail, and the material and stuff that starts to basically delaminate from inside the actual torque converter assembly that attaches to the front of the transmission that material ends up inside the transmission. Can you pull the transmission, put a new torque converter, change the fluid and stuff like that and work great? Absolutely. Can a week later, a month later, 3 months later, all of a sudden something becomes lodged in the valve body or somewhere else in the transmission and you have catastrophic transmission failure? Absolutely. So while flushing it is an option, if it was like, 100,000 miles plus, I would say probably not a great idea. Probably just a drain and fill, run it, drain and fill, run it. Running through 3 full flushes, I don't think I would be doing that. Second of all, if you've dealt with these vehicles enough, you know that a lot of times when you're getting shudder coming from the transmission, it's not just because it needs to be flushed. There's buildup and stuff in there. That's just a generic response that an engineer would give somebody, which typically engineers don't know what they're talking about when it comes down to the actual effect of why this is going on. They know how to build it, They don't know. They don't understand the failure type, the different ways that can fail. It's not a sludge buildup type of thing. It's either a fluid breakdown kind of thing, or torque converter coming apart, delaminating. I'll give you an example. Recently, I had a Chevy Colorado come in. Bought it at auction, really great shape. Once the vehicle warmed up at about 35, 40 mile an hour, when you would tip in at the throttle, it would start to shudder and shake like it was misfiring. I knew exactly what it was immediately when I felt it. Brought it back to the shop, got online, looked up technical service bulletins for it, and it said this vehicle has fluid in it, typically that needs to be flushed out and updated with a newer fluid. Not because there's a bunch of buildup, not even because there's anything wrong with the transmission itself. It's because the type of fluid they originally used is absorbing moisture, and they have a new fluid that doesn't really absorb moisture. So, hygroscopic versus hydroscopic. The two mean, one means that it absorbs fluid, and the other means that it doesn't absorb fluid. Or moisture, I should say. Hygroscopic is typically the term used for something that absorbs moisture, where hydroscopic is a term used for something that does not absorb moisture. So the fluid that's in that transmission was a hygroscopic fluid versus a hydroscopic fluid that they've updated the fluid with, and now it doesn't do that shuddering anymore. So for that engineer to be like, oh, there's just a bunch of buildup, you just need to flush it out. That's not what's going on. The guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He may know what to do to make it run for a while and shift better, but typically it's the torque converter starts to come apart and shudder, and that material ends up in the rest of the transmission. So the mechanic that said it needs a new transmission, he's covering his ass by saying, hey, we got to put a whole new transmission in this thing. I can't warranty putting $1,000 torque converter in here, or $1,400 torque converter job, and then me know that this debris from this torque converter ends up in the rest of the transmission, and then there's a chance that you're coming back in for warranty work. That's not going to happen here. We need to put a transmission in it to make sure you're successful, and you need to service this thing every 30,000 miles. That's a drain and fill transmission. Every 30,000 miles, 40,000 miles, I'd say 30 more. That transmission needs the 4 or 5 quarts drained out of it and 4 or 5 quarts put back in it. Nobody does that, because these dealers and manufacturers don't teach the consumer that this is what needs to be done. So while you got lucky now with a flush, you're not out of the dark yet. A week from now, a month from now, a year from now, it could come back to bite you that something else came dislodged inside that, and the transmission's gone. So that's the two different ways to look at this. And most of the time, engineers, they know enough to be dangerous and how to make something, but they don't actually know what's going on inside failure-wise. And that's just my experience being in this field. Call it what you want, attack me if you want. Engineers aren't very bright when it comes down to why this is malfunctioning.